Hello everybody, and it's time for Module 6. I'm recording this on Thursday night, well before the module actually starts, but before I get on a plane and head across the pond. So anything that might have changed between now and then, it should show up on the message boards. A couple quick talking points before we get rolling. First, Module 6 is a double module. It goes on for 2 weeks, which is the first time that we've had one do that. It is worth 10 points plus 2 journal points, so just to have that available in your mind, and you'll see that in the content area of Blackboard. You'll also see that in this PowerPoint presentation of where those points get split. Basically, we're looking both at the novel and then at the idea of literature circles, and each one's worth 5 in your conversations. And then the journal I'm just going to make worth 2. One journal for both weeks together should be fine. That brings me to my next point with my availability. I'm leaving Saturday and will not be back until the 5th of July, very late, so I will not be anywhere around. I should have email, and I actually should have Blackboard access while I'm over there due to Wi-Fi and such, but if there is an issue, just please email me. That will definitely come through to my phone, and I'll be able to check in and see what's going on. That also means that I won't be on Blackboard every day like I've been the last couple of weeks, but I will try to check in every other day and at least see where you guys are and see what's going on with the conversations. The philosophy papers, the final, will be due 7/11. That's a Monday, and there will be a Dropbox for that set up in Blackboard for you in this module. Discussions, we are at the midway point of the class, and I know in my own experience of taking grad classes online, this is the point where sometimes discussions can kind of start to tilt off a little bit. Please keep doing what you guys are doing. I have to tell you, your giver discussions were excellent. They were a lot of fun to read. I think you guys had some great conversations and even some good arguments going on, while our Hunger Games conversations right now seem to be a little bit on the light side. So please don't back off and continue to do a great job with your posting as you have been doing. Okay, Module 6. Talking about literature circles and also historical fiction. And actually, I built this slide in reverse. We're going to talk about historical fiction first, and then we'll come back and talk about literature circles. But this is Module 6 of our class. Like I said, we're a little bit over the halfway point at the end of this module, and we've covered a lot of ground so far. We're going to jump genres at this point. We started out with realistic fiction in The Outsiders. Then we moved to kind of what the genre would be termed realistic fantasy, if you will, for Percy Jackson. Then we went to speculative fiction in The Giver, and then hard science fiction, more of that style, into The Hunger Games. Now we're going to jump out and go into historical fiction. Historical fiction is an interesting genre when you're working with young people. There are very strong connections that can be made with historical fiction, especially well-written historical fiction. Your students will connect to characters. They will see that human bond, that tie between people in every age and in every country and every existence that we share as human beings, and they'll be able to bond. And your good authors understand that, and they will write these young adult characters in such a way that they force that bond with their reader, and it becomes a very strong bond. It can become a very fierce bond. You'll have kids who really associate with these texts. The situations that these characters are in, students will connect with those as well. Maybe it's a personal history that their family went through. Maybe it's a situation that they can see, just like in any other young adult literature, parallels with their own life. Or maybe it's just an interest in the actual history itself. The other thing that comes a lot of times is these go hand in hand with other studies. Things they've learned in social studies, things that they've talked about in other classes will crisscross into your historical fiction and cause those connections to be very strong. You can see the 3 texts that I picked for this unit, and the 2 that we're going to really focus on are Boy in the Striped Pajamas and The Book Thief, mostly because they're functioning at a slightly higher reading level than Spinelli's Milkweed. I do want to talk about Spinelli's Milkweed real quick while we're in the middle of this. While we don't have enough people to run that 3rd literature circle, the novel is a beautiful novel, and I would recommend that you read it just for your personal exposure as you're moving forward. You could use it for your final project if you wanted to. But Spinelli's writing style is beautiful, and it's a very different look at this period in history that we're going to be talking about. Historical fiction comes with difficult discussions, and I know what you're thinking. Hey, haven't we talked about this already? The Giver's got euthanization and suicide and the idea of adoption not working in a society that's not based on feelings. And in the Hunger Games, we have Katniss killing other people, and we have the death of children while people applaud on television. And all these things are tough, and they bring about difficult discussions. But at the end of the day, you can look at every single one of these and say, hey, it was fiction. Historical fiction takes away that shield in some of the discussions you're going to have with your students. It's going to take away the shield about some of these difficult situations, and you're going to have to put them within the context of what really did occur in history. The way I think about it when I was thinking about teaching historical fiction, you have to teach the history without the ability to remain objective. Social studies teacher can remain objective. They can sit back and say, hey, I'm just going to deliver the facts. That's where it's going to be. While we would like to think we could present the literature like that, it's actually impossible because you're going to have a viewpoint character, and that character is going to force a certain amount of subjectivity when you're looking at the history. It's important for you as a teacher, though, to again focus on the author's take, focus on what the students are thinking about things, and not slide into your own opinion about the historical events. One thing about historical fiction, and this really goes for everything, and I want to talk about this more as we wrap up the course in the very end, but we should touch on it here as well. You really need to make sure you let the parents of your students know what is coming. Now, I personally write an email to my parents every single week. Monday night, they get an 8th grade language arts update email that tells them what we're doing that week, what the homework is, things that they can do at home, extension activities, and things like that. And when it gets to historical fiction especially, parents will appreciate this because you don't know what the connections are in your community to any type of history that your books might be discussing. And sometimes you might have parents write in and say, hey, just so you know, fill in the blank. That's a pretty important deal to have. And it also allows parents to help with those conversations at home, especially with your middle school students. Parents will enjoy being able to have those conversations with their kids. They will be able to extend those ideas and take them to the next level with you. The next thing on here when we're talking about historical fiction, you must research. Not just the kids, but you. You're going to ask the kids usually to research the time period so they have a good understanding of the history going into a novel. I've put up a PowerPoint presentation on Blackboard that I've used before to introduce World War II with several different books. So if you guys want to get an idea of that, that's just a quick down and dirty explanation of a timeline. A lot of times I'll have my students pick things that are applicable to the novel and really do some in-depth research on them and present or write a research paper before we even get to the book. But on top of that, you yourself need to research the time period. I said become an expert. And I say no, really, become an expert. Students are going to have a million questions. And you want to be able to field them at least from a knowledgeable standpoint. I'm not saying you have to know everything about a time period that you're teaching because through the beauty of the internet, you'll be able to look things up pretty quickly. However, it is very, very important that you have a good feel for the flow of the history that you are teaching to supplement the novel. That way you come across looking knowledgeable as you're discussing the book, and you can supply that context for your students. They're going to need that context from 6th graders all the way up to seniors in high school. If you're talking about historical fiction, they will need that historical context, and a lot of times they'll look to you to provide that in the initial reads of the book. Now, as we talk about literature circles and we talk about roles that people can assume, that's a great role for one of the students in a literature circle to assume, is to take on the idea of being the contextualizer. I'm not sure that's a word, but we just made it one, and be the person who kind of has the job of presenting the history that surrounds the novel so that people can ask that person questions. But in the initial rollout of any type of historical fiction, you should have a good handle on the history that you're teaching. I have learned the French Revolution up and down. I have learned the Great Depression up and down. I know anything you want to know about the Battle of Gettysburg after years of teaching Killer Angels. And it's just a matter of being able to have those conversations with students from a point of knowledge and from a point of being able to field their questions without having to turn and say, well, I'm not sure, or worse, giving a wrong answer. So for our historical fiction, we are focusing on Holocaust literature. Holocaust literature is woven throughout many curriculums. Anywhere that you're going to end up teaching, you could see it as young as 6th grade. You could see it as old as 12th. You'll notice the books that I picked really fall in the middle. I think the reading level on the books that I picked is probably something you would see anywhere from 8th to 10th grade. I stayed away from certain Holocaust texts simply because I didn't want to have to read them this summer. There are certain books that are very powerful, and I stayed away from some of those on purpose. When you're teaching the Holocaust, when that day comes and you're sitting down to prep that unit, I want you to think about the toll that that unit's going to take on 3 groups. First, the classes as a gestalt whole, that whole group together. What's it going to do to your class environment? What's it going to do to each individual student? And then finally, what's it going to do to you? Now, let's go in reverse through that list. Until you have taught the Holocaust 5 periods a day in a row, you won't realize emotionally how draining certain topics can be. I can remember just doing the prep, getting my classes ready for reading Milkweed a few years ago. And at the end of the day, I was sad. I was exhausted. And it was simply because I had spent my entire day looking at the cruelty of mankind. That's tough. It takes its toll on you, and there's no real way around it other than being aware of that and what it's going to do to you as the teacher. Likewise, the individual students. This will have an effect on your students. As you read the novels, I want you to think, what will this be like to the students that you're teaching? How will they accept this? How will they deal with this? And you as a teacher are going to have to keep your ears and your eyes open when you're working with this type of literature. You're going to have to be able to stop and pull individual students aside and simply say, hey, talk to me. What's going on? How are you feeling about this? And be able to have that conversation. Don't be afraid to involve your counselor. Adolescents, they feel things in a way sometimes that's magnified. And they can take this very personally and take things in. And it's enough to make an old grizzled man like me sad and depressed and terribly frustrated sometimes. Think about what it does to a 13, 14-year-old who's just seeing this for the first time and asking those awful questions. And then finally, the toll on the class. This will change the tone of your class. If you're teaching the Holocaust literature correctly, it should change the tone of your class. But be aware of that. Be aware of how much time you spend in this unit. And these type of things, these type of meta-thinking things, are the kind of things that will separate a good teacher from one who struggles. Looking at all these different things, tempering how long you spend in a unit, really keeping your finger on the pulse of the classroom community as you're working with these types of difficult literature will be very, very important. I recommend guided research before you dive into any type of historical fiction. We read Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry earlier this year, and we spent a lot of time researching Jim Crow. We spent a lot of time researching the Depression and understanding exactly what that time period was like for the people who were living in it, so that when they got into the book, there were things that they already knew, and they could settle comfortably into that pocket of the story and understand what was going on. The other thing I put on here is you need to be able to listen. Let your kids talk. Settle back and listen to them. Let them have those conversations and listen to what they're saying. And then be ready to answer that awful question, especially with Holocaust literature. Why? Why did this happen? Start prepping that answer right now, folks. I'm not going to give you the easy way out of it. Start to think about how you would have that conversation with your students. How could people have ever done this? Why could it ever have happened? On the right-hand side, that picture that you see is a picture book by a lady named Eve Bunting. It was given to me my first year of teaching, when I was teaching Anne Frank 16 years ago, as a great way to introduce Holocaust literature. It's a picture book called The Terrible Things. It's an allegory of the Holocaust. It's a very powerful allegory. The artwork in it is beautiful. And through the wonders of copyright infringement, and we won't say anything about that, I found a teacher who posted the entire thing on the internet, and I went ahead and linked that for you, but if anyone asks where you got it, I will deny it terribly. I highly recommend that you read through it before you start with your literature circles. And in your circles, maybe your first conversation can be about the terrible things and how you would use that to introduce Holocaust literature in any grade level. I've used it with 6th graders. I've used it with 8th graders. I know in 10th grade they use it to introduce night. It's a very powerful allegory to sit back and look at the Holocaust and what occurred and really spark some of those early conversations. And the art is both beautiful and terrifying. I think that you will enjoy watching it. A quick note on some of the resources that I've linked for you on the content page. If you guys look over at that page, you'll notice that I did link a documentary on YouTube. It is a classic documentary on World War II. It's actually part 20 in a very long series that was on BBC back in the 70s. It is probably the best documentary I've ever seen on the history of the Holocaust. So that's not something I would necessarily share with students, but it is something to work on that self-research as you're putting things together. I've also linked the Holocaust Museum. It is a powerful experience. If you are able to go, it is just down in D.C. It might be something that you want to look at. The other powerful museum to visit would be the Museum of Tolerance in New York City. That might be something you might be interested in visiting this summer as you are out and about. Finally, I did link that PowerPoint that I've made to kind of talk about a timeline of World War II before. I actually use that as kind of a startup lesson to just kind of get them into the names and the places of what happened before they would go into their research. But I did not link a bunch of other web resources. I think part of the literature circle should be you as the reader emulating what the student would do and try to find resources. Now, depending on your students, you might build a list of resources for them so that they have more information. But you guys are college students. I look forward to seeing what you can find as we're moving forward. Okay, on to literature circles and talking a little bit about Module 6 and what we expect to see. Literature circles or the literature circle as a term, is one that has been really used and changed a lot in the last number of years. And it's come to mean a very vague set of requirements. I've given you some readings to kind of look at what literature circles are supposed to be and some ways that different teachers have implemented them. And at the end of the day, I think one of the most important things to understand is a literature circle has value if you make it have value in your classroom. It's not so much a hard set of rules as it is a concept that focuses around small group, student-centered learning, where the students are picking the text and the students are driving the conversations. Anything beyond that is kind of, flavor to taste sort of thing. You get the idea of you creating a literature circle that works for your classroom. So our model is going to be kind of a hybrid model of the literature circle. We're going to have a 4-person literature circle. And you're going to be looking at it both as a reader/student and as a group of teachers who are working within that literature circle to build ideas, not just about responding to the novel, but about how to teach it. The goal of the literature circle, in my mind at least, is for that group to experience the novel together, to have this group experience of a book. And it's not what we've been doing thus far. We've been reading an entire book and then gathering together to sit and kind of respond about it online and have our conversations. Even if we were gathering in person, we still would be having post-book conversations. We would not have experienced the novel together. We would have had time to talk about the novel afterwards. The idea there behind the literature circle is that the group should be experiencing the novel together. That means that they are reading a part of it and then getting together and talking about it. My kids always get frustrated if somebody reads ahead because they feel like that it really ruins the idea of the circle experiencing the book together. There's value in actually reading together as well. Sitting down in a circle and actually reading together and talking as you read, sometimes reading out loud, sometimes just reading silently and then picking a place to stop and talk. That's one of those things that as you have your own classroom and you feel the ebb and flow of a class period, you'll see how that type of activity will work for you. That picture is literature circles in the wild. Those are real live 8th graders in a real live literature circle, camped on my floor, talking about literature. They have their notes from the night before. Each one of them has their job, and they're sitting there having their conversation about literature in my classroom. I just wanted you to see, physically, those kids are chilled. They're relaxed. They're enjoying talking about their literature. They're having that small conversation. And other than me hiding behind them taking a picture, there's not really an adult guide. And they really did do a very nice job. I can remember that specific day discussing their literature that they were working with and actually having real adult conversations and kind of coming to conclusions and asking each other questions about what they had read. So we'll talk a little bit about roles and methods for you all. As I said, literature circles can be interpreted many different ways, and it really comes down to the style that works for your class, the literature you're working with, and then how much time you want to spend. One of the things that I've noticed with literature circles is if you do them the way that the textbook answer is, you can just kiss time goodbye. It's just going to fly away. So you have to decide how you want to implement those literature circles and how you want to work with them. Like so many other classroom techniques, you'll find as you work this week and as you become a teacher that literature circles, you get back what you put in. If you put the time in developing them and modeling them early in the year, by the end of the year, they can be a technique or a tool that you can pull out of your teaching bag of tricks anytime you're walking into a new set of literature. One of the coolest things about literature circles is that they really are a great model of student-centered learning. You are putting the responsibility for the learning in the hands of the kids. You are putting choice in their hands. You're empowering them. You're showing them that they're driving those discussions. And that's what good learning should look like. We should be evidently pushing for that. We're getting away from that teacher standing in front and lecturing and talking about the novel, and now we're getting into the kids really working with it and moving with it and forcing those good conversations. When you get it in your classroom, not so much what we're going to be doing online, but the teacher's role in the literature circle really is to sit and listen. A lot of times on literature circles days, I'll walk around with my clipboard and I'll just write down cool stuff I hear. And that way at the end of class, I'll sit up front and say, hey guys, check this out. These are just cool sentences I heard when I was walking around today. And that'll spark some different conversations from different groups, and you can make sure that they're on task as well as you're moving forward. So for us in Module 6, what I would like to see is the team itself develop the plan of how to use the literature circle. So this is where we get that kind of, foot in two different worlds thing. While you guys are going to be the students, you're also kind of going to be the teachers. You're going to have to develop how to organize the literature circle, what you're going to be looking for, what each person's role is going to be. Now, for those of you who are freaking out already, fear not. I've given you some suggestions a couple slides from now, but I just want to see you guys kind of play with the literature circle as a tool after you've completed the readings and see how you can make it work for working with the novel. When we talk about literature circles, each member should have a kind of a unique role or purpose. That's one thing that I hope you'll take away from the writings and the readings that you're going to have. The idea that we want to have some purpose for reading beyond just we're just going to talk about it. We want to have something to come to the conversation ready to do. When you're using the module readings this week, kind of look at the different ideas. The one reading presents like 20 different roles you could have in a literature circle, all with cutesy little names as well, so you guys can enjoy that. But for you guys, decide what roles you think people should take. Feel free to switch them up. After the first group meeting, maybe you want to switch up roles to let somebody try something different and see how something else would work. This is an experimentary idea. We can play with this a little bit and see what we can come up with. Some suggested roles for our literature circles. If you're stuck and don't know where to start, these would be my suggestions to get things rolling. You're going to want to have a discussion leader, a person who's in charge of setting the parameters for the discussion. How many pages are we going to read? How are we going to do it? Talking about the questions that they want to generate. And again, think about everything we've talked about thus far. Discussion leaders should be bringing those big questions to the table. They should be bringing questions about archetypes and questions about character and questions about theme and those things to the table for the group to talk. The discussion leaders shouldn't necessarily have the answers mapped out. They should instead have a discussion ready to go and see which way the circle takes it. The second role we could have could be a historical connector. This person's job is to come in with the history to back up the historical fiction. Now again, if you're doing a literature circle with something that's not historical fiction, let this role slide to the side. But you have somebody here who can sit down and say, okay, in Jerry Spinelli's novel Milkweed, we're reading about Warsaw. Well, here's what I found about Warsaw. Let me show you these pictures. This is what the ghetto looked like. This is what it looked like before the war. This is what happened when the Germans invaded. Did you know that the Polish actually had cavalrymen on horses trying to fight tanks? Didn't go too well for the poor sods on horses. But the kind of history connection you can bring to the conversation will be important. The third role, and this one's incredibly important, and I'm curious to get your take on this, but to have an artistic person, a person who's able to look at the text in a different way. Now, when I do literature circles with my students, this is always going to be that student who is a divergent thinker, who can come and say, hey, when I was reading, I sketched some stuff. This is what I think the characters would look like. This is one scene that I sketched. Or I had a student one time who came in and said, I sat down and I wrote this piece of music because it was what the scene made me think of. And here's a piece of piano music that I wrote I want you guys to hear. Or a student who said, I was out walking the other day, I took these photographs that apply to the book somehow. Let me share them with you and show how. Or here's a poem that I wrote based upon this. But the idea that you have a person in the circle who's looking at this text and connecting to it in a different way. Try that in your circles this week. Try to find somebody who's willing to go out on a ledge a little bit and take some risks to have some artistic interpretations. And then finally, for our purposes, how about we have a classroom creator, a person who's focusing on the activities and the teaching parts of the book, things that they'd be looking for. Maybe this person pulls out important close reading passages. Maybe this person talks about challenges in the classroom or activities that they would see happening, but they come to the circle with those things prepared. Again, these are suggestions. I'm just putting them in there in case you get stuck. Feel free to change up the roles, to work on different ideas, to work on different ways to make everything gel, and to try different ideas of the literature circle. Reading the book. I've said this already, but the idea behind the literature circle is to build that community of readers who are experiencing the novel together. I recommend that you as a circle set goals and dates, and notice I have it in quotes, to meet. Now that could mean, okay, by Monday we're going to have this set of pages done. Everybody get on Blackboard tonight, make your post, we'll have our discussion. Then by Wednesday we'll be to this point. Everybody get on Blackboard and make your posts. This works much easier in a classroom, right? And you can see that already. Monday, guys, for homework, we're going to read this, this, and this. So when we come in on Tuesday, we're ready to discuss. And then Tuesday, maybe we say, okay, tonight let's cut through a little less pages so we can have a better discussion. And that's a way that the circle can kind of manage the reading back and forth. A lot of times I'll give my students, if we're in the middle of literature circles, a weekly goal. By the end of the week, I want you guys to page 150. How you get there is up to you. Figure out what's going to work best for your circle. Maybe you read some in class, maybe you all read at home. And usually, again, to keep my students honest, I'll ask for some kind of product at the end of the week, be it a review, be it a book poster that the group puts together, be it something as simple as just, these were our big conversation points, Mr. Ninos. This is what we liked about the story so far, and these were the big questions we had, but something there. The other thing I would throw out there is to actually read together. I linked Skype into our content for this week. Skype will allow you to make group calls, and you can actually meet and talk together and read together. It's an option. It's not something I would do with my students, but it's something that you guys might want to do as college students and as soon-to-be teachers so that you can experience that group conversation piece. And if that happens, I would just ask somebody to kind of take some notes and pop them up on Blackboard so that I can read how that conversation goes. Maybe getting together and reading out loud over Skype might be a little bit of fun for you guys too. So it's just something to think about as you're moving forward. Assessing the next 2 weeks. So I'm going to be looking at the quality of the discussion, once again, as being your grade. The idea that we develop the points and questions, the idea that we continue to develop these ideas. I'm looking to see that you guys are interacting with that literature together as a group and you're bringing the different things to the table. I'm looking to see that each person has a defined role and then brings that role to the discussion, and that we can see those roles evolve. Most of you guys are doing a great job in the impersonal world of Blackboard, having those good conversations back and forth. Hopefully this week with a little more metered response, you'll even get more depth than we've had thus far. Okay, so thinking of it in kind of two halves, the first half of the module, and you'll see these are my dates in a second, is going to focus on the book and you guys reading and responding to the book. And then as we get into the second half of the module, I want you guys to talk together as a group about the values of the literature circle as a method, and also where you see the pitfalls. What else could show back up? So I built kind of a rough timeline. Again, I'm feeling a little nervous about not being around in case you guys have questions. So this is, again, purely suggestion. Feel free to drop this. Feel free to do this in your own time that would work well for you. But here's an idea of how I might break this down if I were you. Beginning of the week, 6:26 and 27, decide on the roles, figure out what your first goal is going to be. Then 28th and 29th, maybe you have your first meeting. Then you can see the second, the third. By the 6th, I should be back from Europe. I'll be able to give you guys some good, solid feedback, let you know where you are, how things are going, ask some questions. Then you'll have your final circle meeting, hopefully that week. And then for the end of the module, you can talk about the merits and drawbacks of literature circles as you're wrapping up the module. Well, that's it. So good luck. I hope this goes well this week. Think about this as just a big experiment, a big exploration of the ways that can work, and constantly keep your eye on how can I make this happen in my classroom, because this is a neat technique. This is something that you as a first-year teacher, if you're able to implement, you'll be able to sit down and really have a different method of classroom control and a different method of classroom inquiry based upon these literature circles. I have a lot of other resources on literature circles that I'll be able to share with you that I kind of wanted to wait till after the module to see what you guys think about things before I kind of pepper you with too much. So we'll be able to talk more about those later. Once again, I hope you guys have a great 2 weeks. I'll be available via email and then be back on around the 6th with lots of comments. And I'll probably post a few pictures in the good of the course as I'm touring around England and France. Thank you, ladies. Have a wonderful 2 weeks.